The moment those 4 words landed, I am not an ATM, everything shattered, and suddenly what looked like loyalty started to feel like a carefully hidden financial trap closing in from all sides. Because this wasn't just a refusal. This was a line drawn after decades of friendship, after Diana, after public defenses, after everything that once made this alliance untouchable. And the real question isn't why the money was refused, it's why the request was made at all, at the worst possible moment when the storm was already forming behind the scenes. Think about the timing. Early July, quiet, almost invisible, before London, before the verdict, before the headlines exploded. A private visit, not through lawyers, not through formal channels, but in person, face to face, at a secluded south of France residence. That detail matters, because when someone bypasses every official route and shows up directly, it means urgency, desperation, or something even deeper. And what was being asked for wasn't small. It wasn't symbolic. It was money, real money for Invictus Birmingham, a project already carrying a silent but massive shortfall that nobody publicly acknowledged at the time.
Elton John may be called upon for Harry's legal bills, because the legal bills, and I think we're about to find out in the next week how much he could be up for, could be in the tens of thousands. And that might actually bankrupt him, which would be a disaster, because let's be honest, every venture that these two have been on has been a disaster. I don't know how much money that they're getting. And so Elton, according to Paula, has had enough, because he might be the one that has to bail him out.
Now pause. Why ask for that before the verdict? Why approach someone already expected to carry the legal burden of a case that hadn't even collapsed yet? Because here's where the pattern starts to emerge. The legal exposure was already understood behind closed doors. The risk wasn't hypothetical. It was known. And yet, instead of stepping back, instead of preparing for impact, another financial request was placed on top of an already unstable situation. That's not confidence. That's pressure stacking. And the response? Cold, final 4 words. No negotiation. No delay. No let me think about it. Just a refusal that didn't just reject the request, it redefined the entire relationship in one sentence. Because saying I am not an ATM isn't about money. It's about boundaries that were crossed long before that moment. It's about a realization that something had shifted, something fundamental, something that couldn't be repaired with explanations or apologies.
Not only did you lose the case, but I'm saying that he might have lost Elton John. Like,
yes,
this, he's apparently, Elton John's told him, this was according to Paula Fry, I think you interviewed. I'm not an ATM.
Then comes the silence. The kind of silence that feels louder than any public statement. Because when the verdict finally arrives on July 7th, when all 97 allegations are dismissed, when the legal fallout becomes real and measurable, something strange happens. A statement is released. Strong words, accusations, a whitewash. But one name, one very important name, is missing. And not just missing quietly, missing deliberately. Why step back at that exact moment? Why detach from a statement that directly challenges a high court ruling? Because this is where the legal stakes explode. Words like whitewash don't just express frustration, they trigger consequences. They influence costs. They open the door to punitive financial exposure that could spiral far beyond initial expectations. And someone in that room understood that instantly. So now the pattern becomes undeniable. First, the refusal of money before the verdict. Then, the refusal to associate with the post-verdict statement. 2 separate moments. Same direction. Same distancing. And when the same person says no twice in 2 different ways at 2 critical points, it stops being coincidence. It becomes strategy. And sitting underneath all of this, promises. Quiet promises made before the trial even began. Assurances given to others that they wouldn't have to worry, that costs would be covered, that everything was under control. Not by one person, but by 2. A shared responsibility. A shared safety net. But what happens when one half of that safety net walks away? Because after the verdict, another promise surfaces. Public, specific, a pledge to shield Baroness Lawrence from any financial liability. Not vague, not conditional, absolute, and here's the part nobody can ignore: those words were spoken without the money to back them up. That's not speculation. That's the reality now being whispered in every corner of this story.
I have been told that he actually has asked Elton to give him some money for Invictus. Elton has said no, because court case is such a big deal now. He asked Elton before the judge came down with the ruling, but Elton kind of saw where the wind was blowing, and he was like, because As the Times of London said, Elton and Harry assured everyone else they would take care of the fees.
So now we have a timeline that doesn't add up on the surface but connects perfectly underneath. A pre-verdict visit asking for money, a refusal that redraws boundaries, a post-verdict statement missing a key name, a public promise made without financial backing, and a looming cost hearing on July 29th that will force all of it into the open. And just when it already feels like everything is collapsing under its own weight, the timeline tightens, the details sharpen, and what once looked like isolated incidents begin to align into something far more unsettling. Because the deeper you go, the clearer it becomes that this wasn't one bad decision, it was a chain reaction set in motion years earlier, quietly, deliberately, and now accelerating toward a moment that cannot be avoided. Go back to January 2022, because that's where the first thread quietly appears, when Prince Harry personally reaches out to Baroness Lawrence, not through intermediaries, not through vague invitations, but directly with information that pulls Baroness Lawrence into the lawsuit. That single action matters more than it seemed at the time. Because it establishes responsibility, it creates a connection that later transforms into obligation. Then, October 2022 arrives, the lawsuit is officially filed, 7 claimants standing together and behind closed doors. A reassurance is given Prince Harry and Elton John would cover the cost, no one else needs to worry. That promise sits there, almost invisible, but it holds everything together until it doesn't. Now fast forward and the cracks begin to show. August 2024, when Meghan Markle is already signaling discomfort, quietly opposing the direction this is taking, even as the financial structure around them still appears stable. That warning wasn't loud, but it was clear enough. This path was risky. This path was unnecessary. This path could lead exactly where it has now led. And yet nothing changes. The case continues. The exposure grows. The commitments deepen. And no one stops to ask whether the foundation beneath those promises is actually strong enough to hold. By December 2025, the situation is already strained. Negotiations falter. Settlement attempts collapse. And instead of reducing risk, everything escalates. Then, March 6, 2026, a critical shift. Netflix exits the equity partnership, removing a major pillar of financial stability, quietly but decisively. And just weeks later, March 26, 2026, the reality becomes harder to ignore. The income pressure increases, the need for millions annually becomes a constant looming presence that doesn't go away. And then early July 2026, the moment that now feels like the turning point. The South of France visit, the request for Invictus funding, the refusal, not delayed, not softened, not reconsidered, refused, and the emotional aftermath matters just as much as the financial one, because what follows isn't repair, it's distance, it's separation, it's a shift from partnership to isolation at the exact moment when unity was needed the most. July 7th, 2026 arrives and everything collapses at once. The verdict dismisses all 97 allegations. The legal bill, estimated around $50 million, suddenly becomes real, immediate, unavoidable, and in that same moment, the statement is released, calling the ruling a whitewash, escalating the situation further, potentially increasing the financial consequences. And again, one name is missing, one presence absent, one silent decision that speaks louder than anything written in that statement. But the most dangerous move happened simultaneously, because while the financial exposure is expanding, Prince Harry publicly commits to covering Baroness Lawrence's costs, not privately, not conditionally, publicly, and that transforms a shared responsibility into a personal guarantee at the worst possible time, when the resources to fulfill that guarantee are already in question. Then, July 13th, 2026, and the confirmation lands like a final piece, falling into place the statement that Prince Harry does not have that kind of money. That single reality changes everything, because now the promises, the commitments, the assurances, they all collide with a simple, unavoidable truth. The funds aren't there. At the same time, the Invictus shortfall remains massive. $25 million needed, only $4 million raised, another pressure point that refuses to disappear. And as July 29th approaches, the costs hearing looms not as a possibility, but as a deadline where every decision, every statement, every promise will be measured against reality. And now the situation stands exactly where no one wanted it to reach. 3 separate actions asking for additional funding during existing exposure, issuing a statement that may increase costs, and committing to cover liabilities without secured resources have removed the only safety net that once existed. The one person capable of absorbing the impact contact has already stepped away. The refusal has already been spoken. The distance has already been created. So now the question stops being hypothetical. It becomes immediate, unavoidable, and deeply uncomfortable. Because when a promise is made publicly, when responsibility is accepted openly, when expectations are set so clearly, there is no quiet way out. There is no easy resolution waiting behind the scenes.